Im März 2024 hätte die Europäische Gaskonferenz in Wien stattfinden sollen. Bei dieser Konferenz kommt die Gasindustrie und ihre Lobby zusammen, um über unsere Energieversorgung zu entscheiden. Bereits 2023 haben wir diese Konferenz durch Aktionen und einen ersten Gegengipfel in die Öffentlichkeit gezerrt. 2024 haben sie diese dann abgesagt, aber wir machen weiter. Beim People Summit Against the European Gas Conference haben wir in Workshops und Panels eine alternative Zukunft diskutiert. In den folgenden Aufnahmen hört ihr Stimmen von Aktivistinnen, die beim People Summit 2024 dabei waren.
My name is Arshak Makichyan. I'm a Russian-Armenian climate activist, and now I live in exile in Berlin.
My name is Torres, and I'm coming all the way from Corpus Christi, Texas, where I was born and raised.
I'm Marian Ignat. I'm 23 years old. I have to think about that sometimes. And I'm a climate environmental justice activist. I'm not part of a specific organization in this context, but I work in Romania in some environmental organizations.
Mein Name ist Rosy. Ich bin Teil der Bürgerinitiative, wohne auf der Steyrtal und setze mich gegen die Gasbohrung im Jaithastal in Molne.
My colleague from the Climate Vienna put it really nice. I'm a professional activist. I am part of a movement. It's not an organization. It's a movement that is called Debt for Climate, and it's a movement that was started and is led by people in the Global South.
Hi, ich bin Zinc und ich bin Teil von der Kampagne OMV CO Vergesellschaften.
Hi, I'm Clara Paillard. I live in the UK. I'm a trade union representative. I also campaign for climate justice.
My name is Hamira, and I'm a climate and gender justice activist from Uganda.
My name is Prince Rebecca. I found Connected Advocacy. Connected Advocacy is a grassroots movement that promotes social and environmental justice to ensure that the marginalized communities are given voices. For us, local communities are those people who are the grassroots, those people who live in the community where these oil extractions have been extracted. And most of us, we read them from books. There are people who stay in those communities. There are people who feel the direct hits of oil extractions.
When we had the Karamoja drought that we're still dealing with, so many girls were pulled out of school because they had to, the water they would fetch from probably 2 kilometers, which would take them like 30 minutes to go and 30 minutes back, which is an hour. Then they would spare some time to go to school. The time they went to get the water for their families was doubled. And then the plantations and the crops dried out because of the too much heat. And then the time they had to go and look for food also increased.
We were traditional farmers, we were fishermen. This is our traditional state of livelihood. But right now, due to these extractions, these particular activities are gone.
When it comes to the climate crisis, we become a commodity. We become a means of survival. We become the fallback plan.
Imagine we live in a world where if we provide cheap raw materials, and those cheap raw materials are bought. When they become finished goods, we have to buy them back. But when we're buying them back, you have to understand that, for example, if I come from South Africa and I'm buying back finished raw materials from Germany, I use South African rands, I don't use euros. That means that I have to go to my bank and use rands and transform those rands into euros for me to buy a finished product. Mind you, when I first sold my raw material and I bought that, and that raw material was sold, the rate or the foreign currency rate was different from when I'm now buying it back as a finished product. That means I'm actually buying it at a loss. And when I get that finished product and I've bought it from a loss, that means that I am not breaking even. There's a deficit. In order for me to match that deficit, I have to produce more. In order to produce more, I have to invest more, meaning I have to borrow more. So I'm caught in the cycle of debt. And that's where African countries are currently at the moment. And that's something we need to break. When the Bretton Woods system was created in 1945, it was created to unlock development across the world. There was no African country independent in 1945, unless someone wants to correct me. So my question becomes, why have we allowed systems like the Bretton Woods system to determine economic activity in the 21st century, where it was put in place at a time when there was inequality and colonialism across the globe? Yet we're still using that same economic activity to determine how we function within the financial system as Africa. The same system that was used to perpetuate colonialism, the same system that we're still functioning in, which would explain why we still continue to be at the bottom of the food chain.
Well, I am part of, also the founder of Climate Justice Africa. We educate communities, we educate students, we educate parents, and we empower women in communities, but also ensure that there's justice for the African continent in this fight for a better world and a just transition.
I'm here representing Texas Campaign for the Environment. Texas Campaign for the Environment works across Texas to organize in frontline communities, the communities that are the most impacted by the fossil fuel build-out that's really boomed in Texas over the past decade. We organize within our communities to push for corporate and governmental accountability and a shift in their policies and legislation. That way we can create a Texas free from pollution.
In Molln wird nach Gas gesucht. Das heißt, ein australischer Konzern hat um eine Bewilligung angesucht, nach Gas zu suchen und zu bohren. Das ist jetzt auch schon passiert. Die naturschutzrechtliche Bewilligung läuft mit 31.03. aus. Das heißt, die Bohrung hat ein Ablaufdatum, das wir auch durchsetzen werden.
Die OMV ist Österreichs größter und irgendwo auch einziger Mineralölkonzern. Es ist der 76 größte Mineralölkonzern der Welt, der in vielen Ländern dieser Welt aktiv ist. Sehr, sehr viel in Rumänien, aber auch in Ländern des globalen Südens. Die Idee hinter Vergesellschaften ist, die Produktionsmittel oder in dem Fall eher die Provisionsmittel wieder zurück in die Hände der Gesellschaft zu führen und Energieversorgung generell nicht an Profit und Kapital auszurichten, sondern an den Bedürfnissen von Menschen.
The biggest creditors that we are focusing now is the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, because they give the most loans, and every time they give a loan to a country, that loan comes with structural adjustment that most of the time means that they have to do cuts in the public services like health, education, infrastructure, and these financial institutions are led by the richest countries in the global north that also were the ones who colonized the global south. So the countries in the global north have the responsibility, the historical responsibility, to cancel the debts of the countries in the global south to allow them a self-determined just transition, but also global north has to pay back reparations and for the colonialists that they produce, because that's what allowed them to have the development that they have today.
Wie alle Konzerne im Kapitalismus ist auch die OMV auf Profitakkumulation ausgerichtet. Und das ist vor allem deswegen problematisch, weil wir hier über den fossilen Kapitalismus reden. Also der Konzern wird immer weiter versuchen, fossiles Kapital zu akkumulieren, immer weiter versuchen, Profite rauszuschlagen. Jüngst haben wir das Beispiel von Neptun Deep im Schwarzen Meer, wo ab 2027 Gas fließen soll und von dort an schlagartig Rumänien zum größten Gasproduzenten Europas oder der EU machen würde.
So I used to be a museum worker. I lost my job with COVID, unfortunately. But some of our museums were sponsored by oil companies like BP and Shell. And quite often protesters will come into our museum, which were our workplaces, do their protests, and my union members, they had to deal with this situation, whether they worked in security or cleaning and there was no dialogue. The climate activists didn't really refer to the huge problems workers were facing, such as privatization, precarious work and zero-hours contracts. Once we started the dialogue, we actually realized that some of those issues were linked. It was about capitalism and the commercialization of our arts and culture spaces. So while we had 400 workers being privatized at the National Gallery, the gallery was trying to open an exhibition using Shell sponsorship and using private security to break our strikes. If we want a just transition towards a more sustainable economy, we can create a lot of jobs because we are still going to need to produce the solar panel and wind turbines and develop public transport, more sustainable health systems. Lots of industries, lots of sectors will be affected by it. We need strong food systems, and we need justice for food workers who are often living in poverty, being exploited. Certainly in the global north, a lot of agricultural workers are migrant workers. So all those different ideas of justice must be interconnected.
Africa is a hub for so many potential renewable energies and so many millionaires that can point us towards renewables, and we can become a renewable giant if we are left or we are supported or we are pointed towards the part where we actually invest in our renewables and exploit our sources of energy that are not dangerous for the planet.
I've always felt very close to our natural beauty that we have. And it wasn't until I was older that I realized that, those natural resources were really our only source of free recreation for people of all ages in my community. And I saw that as problematic because I could also see the damage that was being done to it. Fracking is the process of essentially mixing water and chemicals and then shooting it at extremely high speeds into what's called shale, or it's like a specific type of rock, right? So it shoots through the shale and out comes oil, right? And then that oil is captured and then transported via pipeline to the different production facilities. And then in our case, in the Gulf South, right, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, we see a ton of these huge tankers, right, that are capturing our natural resources and then exporting them overseas. And that in turn, causes domestic energy prices to rise, right? And then if you account for the fact that we're in a region, again, with high levels of poverty, it just makes it harder for people to survive.
10 years ago, the UK government wanted to introduce fracking for extraction of gas. A lot of local communities were opposed to fracking because there was risk of water and land pollution, earthquake, and obviously the impact it had on the climate crisis. Some unions initially were supporting of the fracking industry because we were told there will be 70,000 jobs. And a lot of people are unemployed, unions are protecting jobs, and their first sort of reaction was, oh, why not? But actually, grassroots activists in the union movement mobilize, organize inside our trade unions to force our leadership to oppose fracking and to create alliance with local communities.
Fine.
Because the unions had a lot of resources, in the UK, this is the biggest voluntary organization. 6 million people are members of unions. Once the union movement was on board, they were able to dedicate resources, financial, but also encouraging all their members to join the protester against fracking. We brought our union banners, we were putting pressure on politicians, and I believe that the joint effort of the climate justice movement and the unions led to the banning of fracking in the UK.
Wir verhandeln ein neues Thema von globaler Relevanz. Ist es legitim, dass eine fossile Aufsuchungsgesellschaft in Mollen Wirtschaftsinteressen über das Interesse am Naturschutz stellt? Das Problematische an dem Standort ist die Lage direkt neben dem Naturschutzgebiet Jeithaus. Im Naturschutzgebiet Jeithaus werden Magerwiesen geschützt. Das sind sehr artenreiche Wiesen, die nie gedüngt wurden. Das ist ein bisschen kontraintuitiv, dass magere Wiesen artenreich sind. Normalerweise denkt man braucht sehr viele Nährstoffe für sehr viele verschiedene Arten. In Wahrheit sind dort Spezialisten zu Hause, die sich auf diesen Nährstoffmangel spezialisiert haben und angepasst haben und deswegen auch gefährdet sind, weil es so wenig Lebensraum für diese Arten gibt. Da gehören Pflanzen dazu, da gehören Insekten dazu, da gehören gewisse Käfer dazu, Totholzkäfer. Das ist einfach ein ganz besonderer Naturraum und deswegen ist es so problematisch, wenn dort direkt angrenzend eine Gasbohrung stattfindet, die 24 Stunden am Tag läuft, Lichtemissionen, Lärm, Schadstoffe ausstößt. Das stört ein sehr, sehr intaktes Natursystem. Dann kommt dazu, dass in einem sehr nahen Umfeld der Nationalpark Kalkalpen ist. Der ist 2 Kilometer von dieser Bohrung entfernt. Und das Jeithaustal und dieser ganze Schutzgebietsverbund bilden einen Artenkorridor für den Nationalpark, weil die Tiere und die Pflanzen, die kennen keine Nationalparkgrenzen.
So in my case, last summer I was in Spain and I was just reading the news about the Neptun Deep being approved and all the politicians being, oh, this is so good. Romania is going to be the biggest producer of gas in the EU. So all the media was full of the same narrative. I went back in Romania, moved back to Romania, and I was connecting with a fellow activist, and we were frustrated with, on one hand, the lack of opposition in the streets, and on the other hand, the lack of a different narrative. With a few resources that we had, we organized this protest in September for the global climate strike, and we really wanted to put the focus on this project. So we went in front of the government and we said, stop Neptun Deep. And the effect that our protest, although it wasn't big, it was like around 100, 150 people going on the streets. I was very surprised and pleased to see that the media, even the mainstream media, so we were on the national TV, radios, and independent media, they really were curious. I felt that they really wanted to support this different narrative.
Our city was settled, by European settlers after, the native peoples were displaced and or murdered in the 1850s. And until then, the north side of the city was bustling. I mean, it was a hub of economic and cultural activity, but it was also incredibly segregated, right? So we don't just have the Jim Crow South, right? So that's discrimination against Black people in the U.S. South, but we also had Juan Crow, right? Because there were a lot of Mexican immigrants, right? I myself Mexican American, and so for a long time, that area of our city was closed off to Black and Latinx people, right? Until those in power, right, saw that the north side of our city was also very close to the bay, where they could put the port of Corpus Christi. And so they used the process of redlining, right, which is this selective process in which people of color are denied mortgages and like loans to buy homes or housing, right? So they used redlining to move all of the Black and Latinx people into the north side of the city, because now that area was going to be used for industrial development. So they moved all of the wealthier white people to the south side of Corpus Christi, and all of that traditional coal and oil and gas refineries that are associated with the fossil fuel industry, that's where it was put. And now, to this day, we fast forward to 2024, and if you live on the north side of Corpus Christi, you can expect to live 17 years less than those who live on the south side of Corpus Christi. And Corpus Christi is not big by any stretch of the imagination. it's, so sorry to all the European viewers, it's 10 miles away. I don't know how to translate that into kilometers apart from each other. And that the north side of Corpus Christi is still exclusively, Black and Latinx. 20% of the children from my region in the coastal bend deal with some form of respiratory illness. We have extremely high rates of cancer, birth defects, and all of that is compounded by, existing historical injustices, like, private medical insurance. Most people in Texas do not have medical insurance. The fossil fuel industry isn't the root cause of all of our problems, but it does exacerbate existing injustices that are also, felt differently by people of color, right? Lower income people, poor people, working class people. So yeah, that's kind of the many things that we're dealing with.
The Global North is the major contributor to the climate crisis, and if they are doing that and still sabotaging people that need to find refuge and a home after their countries and their communities have been destroyed, then they are playing an extinction game with the global south countries. And it should be remembered that the global north is responsible for the climate crisis and the disasters happening to our countries that are induced by the climate change.
Not many people recognize the fact that Eastern Europe is not the same as West Europe. It's Europe, but it's like the difference is so huge that we can actually talk about two different Europes. We are cheap labor. The companies are going to Romania because they only pay 3% taxes, while in Germany, for example, I think it's somewhere around 33, 35, maybe 40% taxes. So you can see the difference.
So Neptun Deep is a project between OMV Petrom and Rompetrol. So OMV Petrom, is like has headquarters in Austria, but also is partially owned by the Romanian state. And Rompetrol is also partially owned by the Romanian state. And both of them have decided, after more than a decade of exploration, to invest over 4 billion euros in extracting gas from the Black Sea. And this is a project that will supposedly start in 2027 and extraction until around 2047, which will, as you might imagine, emit millions of tons of CO2. Yeah, it's not just about, so it's extracting gas and the gas will be will be burned, therefore this will be very bad for the warming of our planet. It's not just about that, it's also because the Black Sea is a vulnerable space and has vulnerable species such as the dolphins, which are quite an extinct species. So on one side, because it's already polluted, but with the Ukrainian war, there are also reports showing that the dolphins have been really impacted by the sounds and the bombings and everything.
We have a freaking war there. Like, how can you start an extractivist project in a sea where it's like constantly bombed with projectiles, and we have like even farther in the land projectiles that are arriving on the territory of Romania. So that's like a crazy situation that is happening, and this is the fault of the European Union, if you ask me, because they are the ones who accepted. When Romania said that gas is a renewable resource, the European Union accepted.
I was living my normal life in Russia. I was a musician and I was concerned about the environmental crisis, but I didn't know anything about climate change. I was learning English, and on Twitter I have read about greatest strike for climate, and I was surprised why does she protest for climate. And I started to read about it in English, because in Russia there was no information about it. We were basically the first climate movement ever in Russia. And it was not like in Europe, yeah. Mostly I was protesting alone on the streets, then we started to organize the movement, and we were just a few. It was developing, and we were trying to do our best before the pandemic started, and the Russian government used it as an excuse to ban all protests forever, yeah. After the beginning of full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we protested a lot. Tens of thousands of people were detained, arrested, tortured, and now Russia is a dictatorship. We cannot achieve anything by peaceful protests right now, and most of the Russian civil society is living in exile, right, like me. Yeah, Russia is one of the biggest CO2 emitters in the world, or Russia is the biggest gas supply in the world. For example, Kemerovsk region, it's a coal region and like one of the biggest exporter of coal from Russia, and I have friends from indigenous people, and this corporation, they were just burning their houses to make them flee, and then they were kind of opening their open coal mines, and yeah, the environmental situation in these regions where they kind of drill oil or gas or coal is really terrible, and people in Europe, they don't know about these kind of consequences of cheap fossil fuels from Russia. Because these people, they are marginalized, they don't have any access to media, and they live in a dictatorship. If they speak up, then we ask. Like in March of 2022, I fled from Russia to Germany, and I was continuing to speak up, and I was demanding fossil fuel embargo. We were doing a lot of stuff to stop the war, to stop Putin's regime, and to silence me, like Russian regime started a case against me and my family to deprive us our only citizenship, and these trials were going on for a lot of months, and in February of 2023 they made the final decision, and they detained my father, my brother, and they gave them 3 days to leave the country. And now my family, they have 50 years ban of entering Russia forever, because they are a threat to Russian state, even though they even were not involved in my activism. 2022, and before I was fighting against Russian regime, and I was demanding embargo on Russian fossil fuels. And yeah, actually before the war, nobody was listening to us. And in 2023, I was protesting and shouting about the blockade in Nagorno-Karabakh, and I was demanding embargo on Azerbaijani fossil fuels. Nobody was listening, and nobody is listening to us till today. I am Armenian. I lived all my life in Russia, but I was born in Armenia. When I was 1 year old, my family, they moved to Russia because of the war. And the war was also happening because of fossil fuel exploitation. Azerbaijan is another fossil fuel state, and right now Europe is buying more gas and oil from Azerbaijan than ever. In 2023, Azerbaijan organized the ethnic cleansing of indigenous population in Nagorno-Karabakh Republic. Yeah. And Europe did nothing to stop it. And I'm also doing activism about it because I'm Armenian, and I'm really scared now that Azerbaijan, with fossil fuel money from Europe, will start another war against Armenia, even though they kind of deported all Armenian people from Nagorno-Karabakh. And European politicians, they say that, we need to buy gas from somewhere, but when it is happening at the price of not just climate crisis, but also destruction of indigenous cultural heritage, or in the prices like lives of indigenous populations, then I'm against it.
empowered girls and empowered women help to combat the climate crisis and help fight against climate change. And I want to believe in a world that for us to achieve gender equality and gender justice, we have to consider gender equity and make sure that girls do not lose the opportunities to be in school, do not lose the opportunities to be empowered, and they're not collateral damage in a climate crisis.
We need to think big. We need to think about the future of young generation and people in the global south. We can't just look around us. We have to, widen our perspective. Make sure you join a climate justice group in your local community or your country, or also take part into the solidarity movement globally with activists from the global south that are on the front line. They are living now the impact of the climate crisis. So this fight needs to be global, and we can only do it if we work together.
Wir merken, unser Protest wirkt. Nach der Absage 2024 soll die Europäische Gaskonferenz 2025 nicht wie die letzten Jahre in Wien stattfinden, sondern in Bukarest. Doch uns ist eins klar: Egal, wo die Industrie sich trifft, wir leisten Widerstand.